From the dawn of time, humanity seemed to think it was a good idea to do massive self-harm to itself by screwing over half of its own population. You see, the folk with ding-dongs often bossed around the folk with wing-wangs, creating a sort of supremacist caste of males and a subservient caste of females. This pervasive culture of male sex domination has expressed itself in nearly every part of culture. In the English language, for example, the word woman comes from the Old English word weeman, a derivation of the term weefman, which is combined the word for humanity, man, think of the modern word mankind, with the word for servant, weef, defining woman as literally servant person. We literally cannot talk about women without doing a misogyny. So, joining me, Niall, is verified, confirmed, actual woman, and co-host of the Free Speech Podcast, Christina. Hey, Christina, how's it going?
Hello, it's going okay. I mean, I'm hungover and tired as usual, but...
We like to make sure our staff are properly prepared for everything we do, and I must say she is an exemplary example of this. Aye. Tell me something. When was the first time in life you picked up on the fact that you were a woman and hence different from a man?
Well, about 3 years old, I would say.
Okay. And,
well, I mean, at that age, it's very much like you boys, you girls, you know, silly things like that. But yeah, of course, I mean, it's it's easy to pick up on the fact that women are somehow regarded as lesser, even at that young an age. And at that age, you don't fully realize the significance or the extent of it. You just have like, okay, so the guys think they are better than us. Well, all right, whatever. I'm going to do my shit anyways. But as you get older, you realize that, well, it's quite hard to do your shit anyways because society has really put boundaries and expectations that are just standing in the way for you to do your shit anyway.
When I was a child, I was often very confused by gender roles. I suppose I was strangely logical as a child. For example, I did not see, the meaning of certain varieties of clothes being worn by one side versus like trousers versus dresses or something like that. I did not understand why that was a necessity. And I was always incredibly perplexed by it. Being like, you know, the idea of gender roles was just, it didn't add up in my brain. It's like if I were designed the world, I wouldn't design it like that. Yeah.
And I remember as well, I didn't think about clothes at all at that age, but I always was frustrated with the fact that I wanted to play with some toys that apparently I wasn't allowed to play with. And I mean, I play with them anyway. I remember when I was very young and I loved playing with dinosaurs.
Who doesn't?
I mean, come on, dinosaurs are amazing. And I usually played by myself because my mates would be like, ew, that's for boys. And then I would like longingly look over at the boys' toys, or they were like amazing, enormous pirate ships and race cars. And I was like, I want to play with that as well, but I didn't have the social courage to, because that would mean integrating myself with the boys, and they weren't very welcoming. And like I didn't want to hear other people say like, why are you playing with boys' toys? Because I already heard that. But on the other hand, I was like I love playing with My Little Ponies as well, which is very girly, which is like just making the point that I didn't see the reason to.
Toys were toys. There was no specific reason why one should be for one side and one for the other.
Yeah, and I absolutely hated dolls. I absolutely despised dolls from an early age. God, I hated them.
When I was young, they thought I was going to be a girl. I can't remember exactly why. I think maybe the the imaging technology when you were in the womb wasn't as good as it is. And they thought I was going to be a girl, and they already had a name. It was Rebecca. And of course, everyone like bought presents for the new baby. So I had like dolls and stuff. And then when I was actually born a boy, they were like, everyone was in a panic. So like, I actually still had these dolls. And I remember like, I would beat one of them up for some reason.
Right.
And eventually it lost its head because I smashed it over the edge of a stair banister.
Okay, well, that's a bit psycho. I didn't beat my dolls, I just didn't play with them.
That's because they kept moving by themselves.
Okay, well, that's terrifying. What the
When I was thinking, I was actually having a conversation with someone the other day, and we were in this scenario where, we lived in the same place, and say our lives were otherwise identical, except that I was a man and you were a woman, right? Can you imagine that?
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine we were one of us was going to the shop and then going just to buy some groceries and go home. How might that experience differ if I was a woman?
It would feel more scary.
And why is that?
Because, as you said, women are seen as the weaker half of humanity. And,
yes, but what actually might happen that is different? It's not just like a feeling. Is there anything actually physically different that would go on, potentially?
Yeah, I mean, sexual harassment.
Well, like what? What can you expect as a woman? I'm not a woman, so I can't answer this question.
I mean, catcalling, people being really creepy, saying super inappropriate stuff, people just straight up groping you. These are all things I have experienced.
You should probably notice that the levels of sexism are different country to country, so you can really only speak for your society, so that's what I'm going to ask you to do. What is the state of womanhood in Sweden?
I mean, Sweden is a country that's very committed to, doing right. So we talk about the state of womanhood a lot. But I mean, it still is a long way to go everywhere.
If you were to give it a grade between E for worst and A for best, where would Sweden be?
Oh my god. Wow, that's so difficult because what am I comparing it to? What is A? Is A the like perfect utopia, or is A the best thing we have at the moment?
We could say A is the ideal. Women are equal.
Oh, okay. Well, A from what did you say?
E is utterly and thoroughly unequal.
Then I would say between C and D.
Okay, fair enough. I would grant the society I live in, Northern Ireland, between E and D.
Yeah.
Where it's still a very, very religious sort of place, and a whole section of women are still in the kitchen, frankly.
Yeah.
So, the general assessment probably, I think, is quite uncontroversial to say the state of womanhood in the Western world is generally still poor, while in some places like the Middle East, it's god-awful.
Yeah.
Right. So, briefly to touch on this, we need to establish what we mean by a woman. Give me a gut reaction. What the heck is a woman?
I mean, this is like a bit more complicated because there is a difference between sex and gender, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it depends on what context we're talking about it, because a woman can mean a person who is born with a uterus, or it can
female
mean
sex organs.
Yeah, or it can mean a person who identifies and ties their identity with the cultural perception of womanhood, like the traits that are considered feminine.
Correct. We might actually do a future episode if we're still around just on that alone, but we're going to define women in the sense that what society would have traditionally viewed as a woman. So specifically people with 2X chromosomes capable of pregnancy after puberty and so on. It doesn't matter in this case whether, for example, you might feel like a man inside or whatever. We're considering the people of which society regards as a woman, so you're included in womanhood regardless of whether you opt into that or not. You get me?
Yeah.
So as a result, there's a whole section of people which is historically regarded as women and is subjected to the conditions of womanhood, regardless of their identity. And yes, we do recognize and understand that what makes up womanhood has been greatly expanded upon and questioned over time, and the ontology of gender has been a subject which has been studied a lot, and that would take its own podcast. But for that's what we're going for, and that's what we mean by women. Yes, we recognize it's a complicated task, and we recognize there's a lot to being a woman, but that's the working definition we will proceed for this podcast. Are we all in agreement?
Yeah, for the sake of simplicity to talk about this,
All right, then. Misogyny. Christina, what is it?
Oh, it's wonderful, isn't it? It's the idea that because you happen to be a woman, you are worthless in one way or another.
Well, if you actually look at the word, it's from Greek misogyny, which means hatred of women.
I know that's what it means, but misogyny can manifest itself in so many ways that doesn't necessarily have to do with someone. You don't have to be a woman hater to be misogynistic, in the sense that, well, it's a cultural conditioning.
I rather think the term misogyny is rather wanting, because it is quite limiting to hatred of women, while it's actually a whole spectrum of negative perceptions of women.
Yeah.
And it's not just hatred. For example, it's fear also.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wouldn't take the term too literally. I would say that we might consider it unofficially as the general negative range of attitudes that men and some women themselves have against women.
Yep.
If you don't mind asking, well, it could be a personal question, but you're the only woman here and I can't really chip in this. What was the first or at least most significant experience of misogyny against you that you remember?
Ooh, wow, I don't remember any. Like the first.
Not necessarily literally the first, but maybe the one you remember most strongly or the one that stuck out the most.
Yeah, but I mean, this is difficult because it's such an ingrained thing that it's hard to say like, oh, this is the one thing, because it has always been so present.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, I don't know. I'm thinking when you're asking the question, like the most significant, I'm thinking like cases of sexual harassment that has been very scary to me.
Well, for example, when I was at school, right, I spent most of my time with women because I associated men with bullying. So in a weird way, I like ingratiated myself with the female culture, if you will, and how they treated each other and sort of the positive and negatives that go along with that. And one of the most obvious signs of misogyny was at school was that often a guy would get the reward for the end of the year's best student or something when they obviously did not perform as well as a female counterpart that I knew. And it was like, she should have won that.
Yeah.
It's just because the boy was considered more obviously more deserving and the woman was more overlookable.
Yeah, and this is something that frustrates me a lot because there are so many cases, but women are generally put to a higher standard because women are seen as worse, and therefore they have to prove themselves more. So they are always put to a higher standard, are always questioned. We have like the classical, oh, you're a girl who likes this nerdy thing, when then what are all the different variations of this nerdy thing? It's like, well, f*** off. Women are people too. I know it's hard to accept. Women have their own hobbies. It's ridiculous. And there are so many cases of where a certain attitude or behavior would be rewarded for a man, but is looked down upon from women. If the woman is acting a certain way, she's the man is acting the same way, he's respectable, he's cool.
There are double standards.
Oh my god, yes, they are.
Where do you think that misogyny came from?
Well, that's a very ancient divide and conquer. My personal little theory is, Freud talk about penis envy, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. I think it's more relevant to talk about uterus envy. Women are very powerful in that sense because, hey, we can create life in our bodies. That's pretty cray-cray. And I think that the other gender that can't create life in their bodies was feeling intimidated by this and scared by it. Because you're in so much power, you have so much control when you are the one that creates life. So, yeah, the other gender that can't create life is subjecting the gender that can create life to be in their control because...
So breaking down this Christina original theory is that there's a power imbalance of which men felt they did not have a monopoly on the power of creating future generations. So they had to in some way design a society in which they could wield that power indirectly.
Exactly. I think that it originally stems from fear of women.
Mm-hmm.
Or the fear of womanhood, I would say.
Well, here's the theory that convinces me the most. And I still don't think you're wrong, but I think there's a more general theory as to why social divides exist and are encouraged.
Mm.
And that is simply the fact that it stops you gelling together and overthrowing the ruling class.
Yeah, of course. It's, I think the two
people
work together.
Need to remember, and I'm not saying that's the only reason. In fact, I could probably list you 100 different contributing reasons. It's mainly all social divides have behind them is that you want to divide society into smaller groups because smaller groups are less powerful. Now let's state an obvious fact that most people don't bloody think about, right? We've got 50% of the human population, half of everybody is a woman.
Mm.
You've done a lot of your work. If you sunder man from woman, you've already divided the mass of humanity in two. And if you're the ruling class, that's a big win. And let's face it, 100 women is definitely going to beat up a few dozen very overly powered ruling class men. So the more you've got people fighting themselves, the better. So I think that's the fundamental dynamic of why it's considered good for people to be against each other and why these things are encouraged. Because even with all these different, contributing psychological factors, if there was not this general motivation to encourage and maintain divisions, they would not be anywhere near as severe.
Yeah, and I think you touch upon a important part there because misogyny does not only affect men's attitudes towards women, but women's attitude towards other women or themselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. They internalize it.
Exactly, and it's like I always hated this as a child. It's become so much better with time because feminism has become like a mainstream thing, but when I was younger, it was a really competitive thing to be a woman. Like you needed to compete with your peers for whatever. I don't even know what, but it was this culture of yeah.
So you have to be the woman which is judged the most virtuous and the most desirable, and there is a competition among them to see that. In fact, you see an awful lot of media which looks into a female culture. They're always sort of Mean Girls-esque and trying to rise up the social ladder in their own side. And the winners of that are judged the most worthy by men.
Yeah, and I mean, from my perspective, I see that as something that's steadily dying out. I mean, I might be wrong, but it's how I see it. It's made also do with the fact that I'm an adult now, and it's it isn't quite as hierarchical as it was.
Well, I remember in school, as I mentioned, I was always friends with the girls. I was always mistaken for the gay best friend who isn't actually gay. And I prefer women as partners, as bosses, as comrades. And I understand what you're saying about the competition because I literally saw it happen around me. Weirdly, even though I was plugged into that sort of society, there was still the acknowledgement that I was a man and somehow separate from it. But I saw it happening, what you're saying. So I think you might be a little ambitious saying it's dying out. I think perhaps it is accurate to say it has taken a blow, but from what I saw, culture was alive and well, at least where I came from in the world.
I mean, yeah, it was alive and well for me in that age as well. I'm just saying that it's very much not as present for me anymore, and I don't see it to the same extent in today's youth. But I may also be extremely mistaken here. But I mean, for sure, the mainstreamization, or whatever you can call it, of feminism has surely helped, because it has made a lot of people realize that, I hold a lot of, ingrained prejudice towards other women. And
it certainly helps that there's now a general basic understanding in society that there's women saying, we're not actually inferior beings here. You know, that general awareness helps.
Yeah, and that women are starting to help each other rise up instead of competing against each other.
And also reinforcing the general sexist hierarchy.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what I'm saying. I'm definitely seeing the other thing, that women are like, let's stick together.
Brings to mind a slight tangent. It brings to mind that, why stupid liberal media will bring on one example of a minority group like women or black people or whatever, and prop up this person as if they speak for all of them. And it's just because you've experienced less sexism as you got older has absolutely no bearing on the experiences of any other woman.
Of course.
But that's a gripe I have, where liberal media will we've got a woman and we asked her a question. That must mean it stands for all women.
Yeah.
That just absolutely fries my brain. Anyways, I think we're agreed on all that. So, misogyny is hatred, prejudice, or fear against women. Typically, it is the motivation behind sexism, which is the ideology which assigns an inferior status for women as opposed to men. Now, this system we call sexism obviously has a number of, I suppose, definable symptoms. Make sense?
Of course.
What do you think is the most obvious symptom of sexism?
Well, I mean, the divide, the idea that we are inherently different.
Yep, that comes under the first of many of them. The first one is social exclusion. The idea that there are certain roles in society that are off limits because you're a woman.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of that?
Oh, plenty. I mean,
go for it.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally masculine things and hobbies or jobs or, women are not welcome there. And even if people say why aren't there more women in academia? Well, because the last woman that tried to get into academia was bullied out of it. It's ridiculous. And I love video games. I always loved video games. And
oh boy, women in games. Oh
yeah. And it hates me that I can't just be a person who likes video games. I have to be a girl who likes video games. I'm judged differently. I'm held to a different standard because of my gender. I have to somehow prove my interest in video games, even though I committed myself to this as a job. I mean, it's clearly something I'm passionate about, but why can't I just be a person who finds video games a lot of fun and interesting and wants to work with them? No, I'm a woman. I have to really prove myself that I'm not just here to, I don't know, get laid or whatever people think I'm after.
It's interesting where I'm a guy and I know very, 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 very little about video games. However, I would be considered automatically more of a gamer than you.
Yeah, and I don't care if someone considers me not a gamer. It's ridiculous. I'm not here to prove myself. I'm not here to prove my interest. I have already committed a majority of my time into learning how to make games. that has been my dream since a very young age. I'm not interested in proving myself to insecure little boys who can't believe that women can be a gamer, but I hate being questioned for it. Like, just leave me the alone. I like this. Let me have it.
It's very annoying and unfair that you can't just pick up something you like doing and do it. But
yeah,
unfortunately, though, there's parts of the world where this is the least of the worries. Social exclusions for women in some places are things like housing, healthcare, due process and justice, access to education. Do you remember a couple of years ago, there was a story of Malala Yousafzai?
Yeah, I know her.
Where literally she was this Afghan girl who dared want to get an education and actually do something with her life. God forbid. And like she got attacked by the Taliban or whatever, and she somehow survived. You know, like she was very close to being totally dead.
Yeah, I know.
And just out of luck, she survived. And
like, literally a little kid.
Yeah. And she like started launching a sort of a pro-education, campaign. She's almost kind of like a bit of a feminist Middle East version of Greta Thunberg in some ways.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, there was nothing controversial about what she was saying. In fact, she still was Muslim and things that we disagree with. Her one and only thing was women should be educated and they shouldn't be prevented from being educated.
Yeah.
It should be the least controversial thing in the world.
Yeah, I know. It's...
And so for most of the world, these social exclusions are serious social exclusions. For example, in some places where they have Islamic law, the word of a woman is literally worth half that of a man in a court.
Yeah.
Now, what's the point of a court? You're meant to go there and be judged on an equal basis as an equal citizen with everyone. You're meant to have proper due process and all these things. Just simple justice.
Of course, yeah. And
imagine denying that to someone just because they have the wrong sex organs.
Yeah, and I mean, in like basically all of the world, including, feminist societies, men still earn more than women.
Mm-hmm. Another one is, and I think it's very relevant in America and in Northern Ireland at some points, is women's access to healthcare. For example, what about your access to an abortion?
Yeah.
In some countries, they forbid that.
Another thing as well, because statistically, women are more likely to not be taken seriously by a doctor, as well as to not take their own pain as seriously. Women are very good at, like, when you are reporting pain on a scale, women are downplaying their play, while men are like more, and doctors take women less seriously. So, I mean, there's a much better, higher chance of dying from not receiving proper healthcare simply because you happen to be a woman and people don't listen.
Absolutely. Imagine that, like, going into a doctor's office and just thinking, because you're a woman, you are less of a reliable witness to your own experiences than a man is. Like, if a woman goes in and say, "Oh, doctor, my leg is sore," why is that less trustworthy than a man saying, "Oh, doctor, my leg is sore"?
I feel like I experience this a lot because I feel like I'm never taken seriously by any doctors. I just gave up, which, is an issue where it's like, oh, okay, I am in tremendous pain, but I don't want to go to the doctor because I have to like really justify why I'm there. It's like,
yeah, there's just a higher bar set for you than there was for any other random guy that would walk into the doctor's office with the same complaint.
Yeah, or even lesser complaints. Like they... Oh, yeah.
There's probably an assumption, oh, men are tough. If they went into the doctor, it must be serious. Why? Women are weak, so they go and they complain.
Yeah, which is just wrong, because women wait a lot longer before they get help, and they...
Yeah, my mother being one of them, she would sit and wait until she was half dead before she went to a doctor.
Yeah. And anyone who claims that men have a higher threshold of pain are obviously stupid. I mean, Women menstruate. Women push living humans out of their own bodies. Of course, women have a higher threshold for pain. We need to have a higher threshold of pain.
This, in some ways, is a genuinely painful conversation. It's really rather infuriating. But for now, we have to take a break. I'll be back to explore the rest of the symptoms of misogyny in one moment. Sit tight. Thanks for listening to the Free Speech Podcast.
Check in every Saturday for a brand new episode.
If you like the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. It really helps us in the rankings.
If you're on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon to receive full notifications when new episodes are released, and of course, like the video.
Please consider sponsoring us on Patreon. Due to not being based in the USA, our channel is unfortunately not eligible for advertising revenue on the Anchor network.
A small monthly donation will help us cover our costs. Just visit patreon.com/thefreespeechpodcast. Your contribution is greatly appreciated.
And remember to catch us on social media. We're on Twitter @the2peaches.
On Facebook at facebook.com/thefrozenpeaches.
And on Instagram at instagram.com/thefreespeechpodcast.
And back to the show.
Women are literally 50% of society. They are 1 in 2 people. And that's why you should take care when condemning 50% of society. Because in the end, bro, you're angering a lot of people. Now, misogyny has a range of symptoms. We just covered social exclusion, which is blocking women from opportunity and resources like housing, healthcare, due process, education, opportunities for jobs, etc. The next one is sex discrimination. That is when sexism, which is defined as the system of misogyny, which acts on the world to change women's conditions from that of a man, limits the status women can achieve in that society. This is sometimes called the glass ceiling. You ever heard of it?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen any examples of it in real life of women hitting a glass ceiling?
I mean, all the time, really.
I'd imagine you see it a lot in gaming, where, for example, the highest positions in a corporation for a games company are likely all taken by men, even though there's highly likely women who are more qualified to hold that position.
Yeah, of course.
There's been a few instances in my personal life where I am very strongly concerned that a decision to promote someone over another person was motivated by sexism, but it's incredibly difficult to prove.
Yeah.
I always find it interesting that, you see, if you're in a group of friends, just let's strip it down to an example which is much more concrete. A group of friends, there's usually a leader in a friendship group, right? And if it's a mixed friendship group, the likelihood that leader will be a woman is desperately low.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, for sure.
I've even seen this where, like, if there's a very feminine gay man, he is still more likely to be the one in charge than any female participant. And I noticed this, for example, when I was in the military cadets, where we were all mixed groups because the military is mixed these days, but still very often the leaders that were selected for each group were overwhelmingly the guy. And the amount of times I saw the guy being wrong while the woman was like, "Sir, I think we should do X, Y, Z," and she turned out to be right. I have no means to recall just how many times that happened because it was like daily.
Yeah, and like another thing, even if I have a lot of examples where the women have been like the leading person, but even in those cases, people have been resentful in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I even have found this attitude within myself, and I can't begin to explain how much I hate it. Mm-hmm. When you realize this internal misogyny and you didn't even consciously have control over it, and I hate it so much. Wow, I hate it. I have really committed a lot of time and energy to try to eradicate this attitude from myself, and it's hard. It's hard because it's ingrained in you from the start. And even if the woman becomes the leader, people are so much more ready to accept a man as the leader. The women are like, oh, she's a I don't like her. But if it's a man, it's like, yeah, he's respectful. Listen to him. He knows what he's talking about.
Oh, that brings something to mind, actually. You know the way that Joe Biden's vice president is Kamala Harris?
Yeah.
There's like this whole like QAnon-like conspiracy theory on things like 4chan, etc., that she's the one really in charge, right?
Yeah.
And she's the one behind Joe Biden. But I love how they have it both ways, where it's like women are weak in ability, but at the same time, they're the secret puppet masters behind Joe Biden wielding their power. Roar!
Yeah, I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that a huge contributing factor to Trump winning over Hillary was that she was a woman.
Oh, she interesting conversation here. Hillary Clinton was genuinely terrible and believed in terrible things. And it's interesting, though, because America generally loves terrible things.
Yeah.
Just then, how much of the fact that she wasn't picked was due to her being a woman? Because I've absolutely no faith whatsoever in America to be like, oh, we don't like her because we disagree with her policies. That's far too well informed.
Yeah, and I mean, and even though, like, yeah, I disagree with her policies, but at least she's a genuinely intelligent person. As opposed to the orangutan man.
It's interesting, though, because many people have mentioned, and this is probably correct, if her husband was not Bill Clinton, she would have hit that glass ceiling and would never have gotten anywhere near being a presidential candidate. If it wasn't for the nepotism of her husband, she would never have gotten anywhere near it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that's good. Nepotism is awful. But it's the fact is that if it was a fair contest and she was on her own, it just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Do you think that Hillary Clinton would have been good for global womanhood?
That's a difficult thing to answer, to be honest.
I don't think she would be.
I mean, I think a female president would do something good, but it would really preferably be a good female president, you know.
But I just don't think she would put the policies in place if she was a president to actually improve women's lives. She just wouldn't do it.
Oh no, I don't think so either. But like the general attitude. On the other hand, it can also fuel the opposite. Like it can also fuel the
Some people argue the president.
That's hard to answer for me. Like that's really hard to answer.
Of course, some people argue that it would set a precedent, but I would argue against that. Where so many other places around the world have female leaders already. There is a precedent. Angela Merkel of Germany, for example, who is a conservative and awful. But she's still a woman. There's the leader of New Zealand. There's a whole pack of them these days. And these are usually not very good people, to be quite honest with you. But, you know, that's why I don't think the precedent argument makes much sense. There already is a precedent. Just in the Hillary Clinton case. Like, you know what I mean? For example, there's a precedent for awful women rising to the top, conservative women.
Yeah.
But you know, if you happen to be a left-wing woman, at most, you'll be an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the best you can do is make sassy tweets because you're never going to get anywhere near real power.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, most examples of women having power are definitely on the conservative side.
Alrighty, so that's sex discrimination. Generally, limiting the status women can achieve in society. If you're a woman and want to rise up, you're going to hit that glass ceiling, and if it's a very bad one, you might be smeared up against it. You best hope you've got a very powerful male relative. Now, third one is hostility towards women. Now, this one I think is more rare in the Western world. Active hostility towards women. Have you ever experienced that where you've been like shown hostile behavior just because you're a woman?
I mean, how do you define hostile? Because
it's a general one. Verbal threats, sort of. You know, literally like a intimidation and bullying.
No, not threats in that regard. No, I mean, intimidation, like sexual intimidation, I would say, is what I experienced.
I think that will come up in a later one we're going to talk about, but this is like non-violent. Like, I think this would be more common in places like the Middle East.
Yeah. No, I don't think so, no.
All right. We'll move on to the next one. Now, this one's the most interesting because I think it's the one that people are most unfamiliar with the term, but are actually most familiar with the symptom itself. Androcentrism. This is the dominance of the masculine point of view on the world. Imagine like making movies from the point of view of men, writing books from the point of view of men. Women always have the peripheral point of view. The world is seen through a masculine lens. What do you think about that?
Oh, you really hit upon what I really want to talk about,
but it has a name, androcentrism. There you go.
Yeah, I didn't even know it, and I know that books have been written about it, and I haven't read any of them. It's just like my experience as a woman have made me see the same thing as other people have, and it's the fact that when you're a man, you are an individual, you're a person, but when you're a woman, you're a woman. Like, you're not judged for the person you are. You're judged. Always judge out of the perspective that you are a woman. You cannot be an individual, you cannot be a person, you're always judged in relation to your gender, but I don't see that among men.
I think I want to amend your statement there. I think in media and stuff like that, women characters and stuff are always defined in the relationship in regards to their relationship with male characters.
Yeah, but I'm not, of course, yeah, that's another thing, but I wasn't talking necessarily only about media. When you're talking, you said that women are like, looking in from the sidelines. In the real world, that's very much my experience. Like, you...
Sure.
Yeah, like I said, when you have interest as a woman, you have to somehow justify your interest, but if you had a penis, you wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, totally. I wanted to bring this one up because I want to ask you a question. What do you think of androcentrism in video games? Like males as the protagonists of video games, males being made for video games being made for a male audience, things like that. What's your view on that?
Oh, that's I could write books on that one. Well, first off, I want to say that it's much more complicated than, I want more female main characters, because that's totally not the point at all. I really don't care about the gender of the main character, because you can have a female main character, but you still very obviously see that the game was designed out of the male perspective. And what I absolutely hate is when the games try to like somehow entice you with, female bodies, moving polygons, basically. Like, aren't you attracted to this polygonal shape, vaguely, of a woman with huge look how much you want to bang her. It's like, no, I don't. Can't we just go back to shooting the bad guys?
I'm having a hilarious flashback to the reaction of some gamers when they produced the modern Tomb Raider games, where they got rid of all of the, overly exaggerated breasts and everything, and she actually looks like a real person.
Yeah.
And like they all nearly had a seizure.
It's crazy. Like, I mean, I want to iterate here that like my favorite story-driven game of all time, not my favorite game of all time, but my favorite story-driven game of all time is definitely Red Dead 2. I love that game, and you play as a man in that one, and I absolutely love that main character because he's you can tell that they put a lot of effort into not making it so much male-centric, but you are looking at the world from this character's point of view, not necessarily from a man's point of view. You get the difference here. So it's very different, and I absolutely adore that game, and I adore playing as Arthur Morgan, one of the best characters of all time, really in love with him. So like, that's not the point. It's not that I want to play as a woman. I just... the world and how you are presented other characters.
One last question.
Should be gender neutral.
Yeah, I've got one last question on the subject. Just a couple of days ago, they released the remake of one of the most popular video game series in living history, the Mass Effect series. I would like a quick opinion on the alien race you encounter in the game called the Asari.
Oh.
The blue ladies.
I personally, when I played Mass Effect for the first time, it was very obvious for me that they were designed to be sexually appealing to the player.
Go on.
And, this is the perfect example of the thing that I hate. Like, look, I'm a woman. Female bodies don't really excite me, alright? I have big breasts, okay? I hate them. It's not something that makes me excited. And I'm a gay woman as well. So, like, it's not that I don't find women interesting in that regard. But the whole, very, like, oh, look, she's sexy. Oh, leave me the alone. It's so annoying. I hate that so much. And I really experience it like that they are somehow forcing it upon the player, the main character. It's especially noticeable when you are playing a role-playing game and you're supposed to model the main character out of who you want them to be. And you're like somehow forced to be attracted to this character. It breaks immersion so much and becomes so obvious that this game was made by men for men.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. I was very interested in hearing your point of view there. On to the next one, and it is patriarchy. Now, this is it's related to sexism in that I would call it the actual result of sexism. It's the power structure that is emergent from sexism. Do you agree?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is the most obvious symptom of patriarchy in the real world?
Oh, the fact that most people in leading positions, in high positions in society are men, overwhelmingly men.
Absolutely, and it is that simple. Those with power, actual power to say things and make stuff happen are mostly in the hands of dudes.
Yeah, men are the overwhelming majority.
I always love the adage about the centrist parties and the Democratic Party. They think that, instead of the Republican Party who thinks that 5 men should rule the world, the Democrat Party thinks there should be 10 rich people, 5 of which should be women and 2 of which should be black.
Yeah, girl boss feminism, right? That's a whole topic in and of itself, and I hate it.
I wanted to ask you about that because I'm not entirely sure about it, to be honest with you. How much of the women that somehow succeed in the patriarchy are simply women who have adopted masculine traits?
Well, you have to adopt masculine traits to reach a high position in society because masculine traits are valued. But it's also very difficult to be a woman with masculine traits because masculine traits are not valued for a woman. So that's difficult. But of course, if you are a woman that has reached a high position in society, you sure as hell didn't do so by exhibiting traditional feminine traits.
I would argue, though, that's still patriarchy then.
Even if it's of course. Women. And I just want to make a point here. I absolutely don't believe in there being any inherent differences between the genders. It's a cultural phenomenon, maybe even a culturally bred phenomenon, but not like an inherent truth about the gender. So I hate this distinction with masculine and feminine. They can be useful as somehow archetypal words, but to limit them to a certain sexual organ is ridiculous.
All right, next one. And this is something we touched on slightly earlier, and it's male privileges, which are advantages in the world which exist solely for men. I think this is our idea of double standards, the way that men can get more simply for being men by default or get away with more.
Yeah, I really feel this strongly because I feel that if I had a penis, I would be way more popular and way more respected than I am. Because I'm quite assertive. Weirdly enough, because I was the shyest child in the entire world. But somehow I grew up and I suddenly became very assertive. And that's not acceptable for a woman. But if I had a ding-dong, then that would really make me, the top dog.
Can I be Derby Blunt in saying so that an assertive woman is generally regarded as a by men?
Yep.
But you can be an assertive man and you're like, oh, look how bloody awesome you are.
And, generally regarded as a by people, also regarded as a by other women.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah.
Next one, the belittling of women. Can you think of an example of where women are belittled?
Of course.
I think I just gave one where if you step outside your boundaries as a woman, you are called a you are belittled for daring to step out of this box.
Yeah, and we talked about this earlier when women are not taken seriously with medical issues, for example. And I have another example because I studied philosophy at university level for a year. About a year. Yeah, a year. And we were doing an introductory course to logic and where, put into groups, and I happened to be in a group with like 5 other dudes. There were quite a lot of women in that class, so it wasn't like, mostly dudes, but the group I happened to be put in was just dudes and me. And we were doing a set of, logical, logic questions. Yeah. Very basic stuff, very basic, like 1 + 1 = what, but not math, but logic, but it's very similar. And I basically just wrote down the answers for like 10 questions right off the bat within a minute, because I had already gotten an introductory course to logic, and this was like so basic to me. I was like, oh, I know the answer. And, not like, oh, just write this down, but actually trying to be helpful and explain why, because I realized that, all right, I understand it better than them. That's fair, because I learned this before. So, of course, it's not like I looked down on them. The thing that's annoyed me is that no one took me seriously and proceeded to ignore whatever I said, tried to answer the questions from themselves, and getting all of them wrong and having to do it all over.
Yeah, so people automatically assumed what you're saying was innately not worth listening to, regardless of its content.
Yeah, and especially...
Right. We need to move on. We really do. We're running out of time. We need to go on to disenfranchisement. Literally, for most of history, women were not able to vote. It was only in the suffrage movements, which the suffragettes were named after, that women got a chance to vote. Do you think it was important that women were able to contribute to the political process?
Yeah, of course.
How important do you think it was a big success, or do you think it was actually a bit of a red herring where it didn't really matter in the long run?
Both,
Tell me why.
Well, definitely a big success in regards to the cultural attitude towards women. The women stepped out of the kitchen. Surely something that, made things at least a little bit better. But the red herring in regards that voting in and of itself doesn't really change all that much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Next one is violence against women. And we can see this with sexual assault. Have you had any experience with sexual assault?
Plenty.
Is there any details you can give?
Oh, yeah.
Don't give us anything you don't want to say. Just like.
No, but the thing that ingrained itself into my memory the most, and it isn't necessarily the worst one I experienced, but it was the scariest one, because I was in a strange country. I was in Romania visiting my family, in Transylvania. You call me a Hungarian. Well, I'm a Transylvanian Hungarian, and Transylvania is in Romania. While I was in Romania, I was at a public bath. I was 11 years old. 11.
God.
So very young. And there was this man, maybe early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, I would say. And he would have his eyes on me all the time, constantly looking at me, but sneakily, he didn't want to me to realize that he was looking at me all the time. And whenever I went, he was always near me, always. And I mean, I was the cunning little girl, so I realized this very early, but I as well tried to pretend that I didn't know that anything was wrong, because confronting him would be scary, because I was an 11-year-old girl in a strange country where I don't know the language because I don't speak Romanian.
Well, what could you do?
Yeah, what could I do? And well, eventually it evolved to a point where he would just straight down grope me. But in a way that he was trying to make it subtle, in an annoying way. Like, he would swim past me and he would touch me.
Okay, that is absolutely grotesque.
Yeah, and he would do that over and over and over again. And I was just trying to get rid of him. And my little cousin was there with me, and she was small and annoying. And I didn't really want to tell her what was going on. What could I do? What could I do? So eventually I was like, I dove and I swam away underwater. Mm-hmm. And I looked back and he was like looking over for me. He was like, searching.
Oh, well, could you got away anyway?
It was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. And I told my father, he was like, where is he? I'm going to kill this man.
All right. Thanks for that. That was horrendous. Now, the final one we've got here at last. And I think this is very interesting because it's so tied in with capitalism, and it's sexual objectification. This is the removal of all traits from a woman except their sexuality.
Yeah, I mean...
Thoughts on that?
Been there.
I just think of Coca-Cola on this. Let's put a naked woman beside our drink. That makes you want to buy our drink, doesn't it?
Yeah. Of course, that's another thing. It's not just that you're put to higher standards of women, or you're always seen as a woman, not a person, but you're also seen as a sex object. Mm-hmm. Someone that is just sexually for your pleasure, regardless of what she wants. And, well, been there, done that. I happen to have large boobies because of genetics. Yes, I'm one of those rare people. And I'm also very thin. I hate it. This is not like a humble brag. I made a breast reduction. Didn't get as much reduced as I wanted to.
I think that's even more sinister than what you make it say is. You say it's regardless of what she wants. No, this removes her ability to want anything.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, like, that's the reason I bring up my breasts. Well, because, yeah, I mean, I have been objectified from such a young age.
To this
11 years old. Like,
I hate this one the most because it says women are objects and not people. They're not even, like, previously of what we've talked about, we've discussed females as a repressed people. Kind of like black people or other repressed minorities. But this one removes the fact that they are people.
Yep, it does.
Like, in my opinion, there's something just so deeply offensive about that in every single way. It's like taking away. Let's not call her she. Let's call her it.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think happened when I was 11 years old and grew up by creepy dudes?
I don't actually know. I think sometimes when creepy dudes come, they do view you as a person because they enjoy tormenting you. If you were an object, there wouldn't be the same amount of pleasure. You need to be a person to suffer.
But this guy was really trying to be supple about it,
Well, because he didn't want to get caught.
Well, yeah, sure. But yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think objectification does play a huge role in it. And like this example, when in Romania, me and my cousin were taking a walk by motorway, and we were wearing, in case someone asked what we were wearing, regular clothes for an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. Literally just jeans and t-shirt. Not that would matter, but every single car that drove by would honk for us. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like, we are kids. We are children. We are not here for you to look at our and imagine sticking your ding-dong in them.
All right. Quick mention before we go on. We are meritocrats and we are fond of philosophers, and we know a lot of philosophers, and we are also very intellectually honest, and we know that a lot of philosophers have had opinions that we now disagree with. I'm going to give an example of The philosopher Hegel, who created the dialectic, which is at the centerpiece of meritocracy, as it's the evolutionary progression of society itself. It's how things move on. And
my favorite philosopher. He also said some terrible things, so let's hear it.
Hegel said of women, "Women are capable of education, but they are not made for activities which demand a universal faculty, such as the more advanced sciences, philosophy, and certain forms of artistic production. Women regulate their actions not by the demands of universality, but by arbitrary inclinations and opinions." This was a very typical opinion of the time. For example, there's very Victorian English people, for example, were like, "Oh, the women, they are not able to do all of the important subjects like science. Oh, yes, sir, please. That's the permanent realm of the men, I tell you."
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I just wanted to make the point to say, we are very intellectually honest. We point out when some ideas are bad and some ideas are good. And where we massively agree with Hegel and we think he was a genius, he wasn't right about everything. For example, saying that women can't do artistic production, well, the fact that Christina exists rather debunks that particular theory.
Yeah. I remember he also said somewhere that women are like plants and men are like animals. Something stupid like, no, because women like plants, women like flowers more than animals, and flowers are less advanced than animals. That means that women are also less advanced. It's ridiculous. It's like, what dude?
Right, we need to quickly finish this because it's very important. In fact, we may do a full episode on this. Religion and misogyny. Christianity and Islam, Rajdi, we're going to cover them because they're the two world's biggest religions. Don't worry, we hate your religion too. Calm down if you're not either of those. No, Christianity and Islam tend to fear women as seductresses. They see, especially Christianity, sees women as the conduit of initial sin. The Catholic priests are all men, and it generally promotes a view as a woman as the helper of a man. Islam views women as being owned by a male caretaker who may punish them, for example, with physical violence if they disobey. It requires women to stay at home and be a traditional wife. Women only deserve half the inheritance men receive. It also permits sex slavery. For example, the Quran forbids you having sex with married women, but you may have sex with married women if they're your slave.
Yep.
Do you think we should have a full episode on that?
There's a lot of talk about in how much religion, how much it has to do with sexism for sure.
I think, yeah, definitely. I think we're going to need a whole episode on that. I think we'll put a pin on that. That's a can of worms that needs to be cracked, and do it justice.
That's a huge can of worms.
Right. The last thing we're going to visit on, this will be another future episode, so I'm just introducing you to some things to keep them in your brain. Mm-hmm. Now, the idea of feminist...
My puny little female brain.
Yes. Yes, it's not capable of the finer artistic productions.
No.
And this is a feminist theory, and we'll probably have another episode again on feminism. The good and the bad woman. Feminist theory proposes women are either good or bad. If they display submissive behavior, sometimes called as Madonna behavior, that makes them more controllable by men, they're rewarded as being good. If they behave in bad behavior, sometimes called whore behavior, they are punished by men and are labeled bad. So it's often called the Madonna whore situation.
It's funny that you say that, because I wanted to bring that up in regards to religion, that so many men suffer from this issue. The whore Madonna complex is basically that men can only feel sexual aroused by women that they don't respect, and conversely, they cannot feel sexual arousal for the women they do respect, and it's a huge problem. I hope I don't have to say why.
Ironically, it also puts up the Madonna, the virginal girl, as the height of virtue, where the virginal, angelic and stuff like that, and they're viewed as good. But in reality, secretly, all the men want a whore, but they always pretend like they want a Madonna.
Yeah, but they also don't respect the whore. That's the thing. They hate the whore.
Yes, I know. When you go into psychology, what they really want to do is, for example, if they get the Madonna, they want to debase her into the whore as well. They want to deflower the virgin.
Yeah.
I'd say that's another can of worms you'll definitely revisit. That's just one feature of feminist theory. This episode was not about feminism. It was simply about misogyny. All right, that's all that we have for you this week. You will definitely be hearing more about women on the Free Speech Podcast in the future. But for now, stick around where we will have our final section where we bring down the hammer of judgment on nonsense we find on the internet. Stick with us until then. The internet, actually, I think you should say it this week, Christina.
Okay.
Go, the internet?
Should I just, okay. The internet is a terrible place.
Oh, come on. The internet is a terrible place.
Okay. The internet is a terrible place and it's filled with terrible people.
You see, that's what comes out of the inferior female mind. As of the time of recording, the state of Israel is in the midst of launching an assault on the Gaza Strip. The violence began with an Israeli raid on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in the religion of Islam. This resulted in retaliation with rockets by militant group Hamas. This resulted in a heavy-handed response from Israel, including the bombing of residential and office buildings, including the collapse of a building used by the Al Jazeera news outlet and the Associated Press. For the first time, to a limited degree, the unbalanced nature of this conflict is being referenced in Western media. Have you been hearing about this, Christina?
No.
Typical news-resistant Christina. This has been a conflict which has been going on since effectively the end of World War II. It's just endless.
Oh, I know that part, but yeah.
And there's a recent invasion. It's dominating the news where one of the most advanced militaries in the world effectively is attacking this tiny little sort of open air prison place called Gaza, where they barely have water and food, never mind advanced weaponry. And generally the Western media pitches it as like an equal fight between two armies, when it's really an army versus a roughed up militia. And it's interesting because the right wing is like, yeah, Israel, teach those Palestinians a lesson, they're all terrorists. And the left wing is like, oh, free Palestine, aren't the Palestinians wonderful? And I think it's like one of the most idiotic discourses I've ever heard. Because, and this I think really tests whether or not you are principled in your political outlook, right? The Palestinians are a Muslim society. They're incredibly conservative, and many of them are terrorists. But Israel is an ethno-state, which is doing colonialism and ethnic cleansing. Why can't we condemn both?
Yeah.
That does not mean they're equal. For example, it's horrendously unbalanced. It's similar to like when the Northern Irish Catholics were being repressed. Were the British right to repress the Catholics? No, they clearly frickin' weren't. Does that mean the Catholics were wonderful? No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Why is it so difficult for people to say you shouldn't repress people, but it's also not cool to be backwards religious fundamentalists either? They're not mutually contradicting. It doesn't matter who you're repressing. Don't do repression.
Yeah, for sure.
And it just shows how, unprincipled so many people are in their politics, where it's like, we can't see the wood for the trees. We can't be honest about what's good or bad, what's positive or negative. Like, for example, we don't have to paint the Palestinians as angels. In fact, let's be really overly critical and say they're satanic. They're awful. The Palestinians are grotesque. Does that mean that Israel has a right to repress them?
No.
Absolutely bloody well not. It doesn't matter who is the repressed. Repression is the frickin' problem.
Yeah.
Why is that so hard?
I don't know. I think it's a general tendency for the left to side with the underdog and the right to side with the alpha.
It's
very...
What frustrated me about this, I wasn't even going to mention it because I don't like either of them. They both believe in terrible things. They both believe, which is interesting, where Israel will say, oh, look at these Muslims. They're backwards and prone to violence. We can't free them from their open air prison we made because they're inherently violent. Dude, you're a Jewish ethno-state. What the hell?
Yeah.
It beggars, but it's one of the most vicious and most idiotic conflicts I've ever heard. So that's what I didn't want to talk about. My point I wanted to raise is, why are we so blind to reality where we can say it's not acceptable to repress anyone?
Yeah, because intellectual honesty is an acquired skill, I guess.
But the funny thing is, these people that are selectively blind in this way, they're usually very open-minded. They're usually, for example, people that you can trust. That they've got a, like, for example, the idea of free Palestine, the idea that Palestine was this wonderful place. It kind of reminds me, it's like United Ireland because Ireland is innately good. It's got they just totally ignore the fact that Ireland is to this day is run by a right-wing government. If you're left-wing, why would you want a united Ireland? It's, you know what I mean? It's these very simple emotional stories that totally blind you to reality.
Yep. Yeah, you're right.
Is it worthwhile asking your opinion on this if you've actually not been keeping up with it?
I agree with you. I actually don't know what else to say. It's quite simple as that.
One thing we can be openly sympathetic is a great deal of victims of this war are children. Children are innocent. Children have done nothing wrong at all.
Yeah, that's horrible.
When you murder children, you're an
Yeah, a bit more than that, but yeah.
And I also find this annoys me because let's think of the Jewish people that meant to make up Israel. The Jewish people went through a trauma like no other. And they seem to split into two camps. One side sort of became less religious and provided some of the biggest geniuses the world has ever seen. The other side became their own version of Nazis.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And, for example, just a couple of days ago, the non-warring parts of Israel, they just ran like a far-right Jewish group. Just imagine saying that, far-right Jewish group, pulled out just a random Arab from a car and started beating the crap out of him on the street. Literally just some random dude.
Weird.
But the idea that a far-right Jewish group can exist after the Nazis just...
Yeah, but I think that's like somehow psychologically it's like it doesn't make sense, but I can see how it went in that direction.
Another thing is, a great part of this conflict, it is settler colonialism. In fact, I have a problem with this with some lefty people, where they like try and paint it as all settler colonialism. It absolutely is settler colonialism, but it's also a religious conflict.
Yeah.
But a lot on the left try to deny religion as anything because they've got into this mind that religions are innately good, they're innately peaceful. It's not at all. For example, there's a reason why the Israelis attacked the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Because they knew it would cause Hamas to launch rockets, and that would give them excuse to invade with their tanks and their American-provided super weapons.
Yeah.
That was purposeful because Netanyahu, their prime minister, knew rightly, if they do something on the third holiest place in Islam, surely that's going to get a response. Fairly safe that's going to get a response. Third holiest site in the entire religion.
Yeah.
By the way, it's also a holy site for Jews because that's where the Temple of Solomon used to be. It's also a holy site for Christians in that some evangelicals believe that the temple must be rebuilt in order for the second coming to happen. which is one of the reasons why America supports Israel. There's a whole, well, we could talk about that some other time as well. A whole nest of disturbing reasons why America protects Israel, protects them in the UN. The UN always tries to bring up that they're doing things horrendously illegally, but because America is on the Security Council, they have a veto. Every single time they bring up, we're going to criticize Israel, the US says, nope, veto, not doing it.
Ugh.
By the way, the idea that there's 5 countries out of all the countries in the world who have a veto on the Security Council is a grotesque injustice.
Yeah.
You shouldn't get a veto on a frickin' Security Council. That just means, like, you're doing something wrong, I'm going to veto it so you can't criticize me. Screw you, man. International law is another thing I want to talk about because it's so dumb because it doesn't matter because no one can enforce it. I think we'll leave.
Yeah. Bummer.
This entire issue has so much to it and it's infuriating and I hate it. And by the way, to relate back to our topic today, women in Palestine and Israel, they're not treated very well. They're suffering as a result of this. Women and children very much suffering as a result of this. They didn't do any of this and they don't deserve any of this.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Let's go on to the next story, where there shall be flowers and happiness. Oh, wait, there'll be misery and death.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to give you hyper-local news from my neck of the woods, my tiny little region of the world with only 2 million people. But I think it has sort of reflections on issues that exist around the world. All right, ready?
Mm-hmm.
The major unionist party in Northern Ireland, the DUP, has gotten a new leader. Edwin Poots, who has already been given the nickname Eddie Poops, who is from the conservative wing of the DUP. This is already a far-right party, so imagine the conservative wing of the far-right party. The party which rose to UK national prominence when it was helping to prop up Theresa May's government until they were resoundingly thrown in the trash by Boris Johnson. Poots replaced more moderate leader Arlene Foster. Some of the more notable quotes he said are as follows. So we're going to go through some of his quotes and I want you to tell me at the end what you think of this guy, right?
Yeah.
On asked his opinion on the age of the Earth, Edwin Poots said, "My view on the Earth is that it's a young Earth. My view is 4000 BC.
What?
If you do the counting on that, that means that he thinks the Earth is 6,000 years old.
Wait, he said that his opinion of it.
My view on the Earth is that it's a young Earth. My view is 4000 BC.
That's such a weird thing to say.
It's interesting because he's a part of a fundamentalist Christian group. And God, years and years ago, one of the first attempts mankind made to determine the age of the Earth was they decided to like add up the ages of the patriarchs in the Bible. And so they came to a certain amount of, you know, these ones like they said like somebody lived for 5,000 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
And like, no, they bloody well didn't. And then they added up the last 2,000 years since the death of Jesus. And like, that must be how old the world is, I guess.
Flawless reasoning. Absolutely.
Absolutely. There's no way that could possibly be wrong at all. But yeah, so these young Earth people still exist and they have a contingent in the DUP and now their leader is one of them. And I must stress, they're the ruling party in Northern Ireland. They're the bosses, bro.
Yeah. You know what my grandma said once? And it was something that surprised even me. And she says a lot. This was like, wow, really? She said that she's skeptical about the existence of dinosaurs. It was like, why? She was like, I don't know. It just feels like I'm not sure. It's like, but you know that this is a fact. It's like, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm like, what?
Has she ever been to any natural history museum worth its salt?
No.
Because, like, you know what somebody said? Drew these pictures of these things and said these were real, but had no evidence for it. Fine, be skeptical. No, like, we literally have their skeletons. We have a lot of them. They're everywhere.
Like she isn't known for being the most rational person around, but that was bad even for her.
Imagine she's just really, like, I don't like the sound of them. No, they didn't exist.
Yeah, or like I'm not sure about that. It's very strange. Anyway, I'm sure that if I brought this up to her, she would totally, genuinely don't remember it and deny it, because she's also extremely inconsistent. So that's another thing.
You gotta love that idea of like your tastes being the arbiter of everything. It's just like, I'm not entirely fond of that idea. I'm going to erase its existence. Bye-bye.
It's strange, yeah.
On the other hand, but these guys, genuinely, this is part of their religious beliefs. And they are they're evangelical-like, so they believe in spreading their religious beliefs. That's a problem.
Yeah, this is so weird, though. That I mean, what I react to is that he frames it like, my opinion is that this fact is not in fact a fact. You know, it's weird. It's weird. Like, they don't know the difference. It's oh boy.
Would you like to hear his opinion on homosexuals?
Oh my god, let's hear it.
He said, basically, it's unnatural in the first instance, and it's abominable in the second instance.
Right. Well, no surprises there.
It was a couple of years ago that the official, like, stance of the DUP on homosexuality was that it was an abomination. Like, we're not talking this was their belief in the 80s. This was their belief in the 2010s.
Doesn't really surprise me. I mean, we all know that religion is backwards.
I have to give
holds back evolution.
One of the most popular people in Northern Ireland is Stephen Nolan. He's like the most popular radio station in the entire country. I personally can't stand his radio station, but it's really popular. In fact, its jingle is most popular show in the country. I really hate it. It's really obnoxious. But he actually said to a DUP representative, why have you changed your tune in some regards? Just a couple of years ago, you were saying gay people were an abomination because Arlene Foster was trying to walk back some of the more extreme things in her, her belief system. And Arlene Foster was the previous leader that he replaced, right?
Uh-huh.
He thought that the DUP had become too liberal. They'd gone away from thinking it was an abomination to just saying the usual, we believe marriage is between a man and a woman. Soft hatred. He wants to go back to just a plain old goddamn hard hatred.
Sounds like a delightful person. I
know, and she was like, Arlene is a liberal. Watch all liberals have a seizure. On gay couples adopting, he said, it should be a man and woman who raises a child.
Yeah.
On gay people donating blood, he said, I think that people who engage in high-risk sexual behaviour in general should be excluded from giving blood.
Okay.
What does that mean? Does that mean like anyone who like does butt sex is not allowed to give blood?
Well, he thinks that, you automatically get AIDS if you...
I'm trying to think what they mean by high-risk sexual behaviour, because it's not what the scientists mean when they say it.
I'm supposing that you test the blood before you give it to another person, that it's, safe.
Yeah, I've never understood why they ban gay people, because they still do it in lots of places from giving blood. They test them for these things, for God's sake.
What? I mean, talk about it, it's so counterproductive.
In fact, the need for this, whether or not you can give blood and the testing of giving blood is a current debate in the US at the moment. It's in the news there at the moment.
It's probably these fragile men who are really terrified that if they ever need blood and they're given the blood of a gay person, that they would themselves turn gay, because they are actually, so deep in the closet that...
His final comment I've got for you is his opinion on the previous leader, Arlene Foster, who you'll be replacing at the end of the month, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this will lead back into our main topic. He said, her most important job has been and will remain That of a wife, mother, and daughter.
Right.
So basically, she was really, really right-wing. Like, I can't stress how right-wing she was. But because she's a woman, nope, they all hated her and they wanted her out.
I really don't understand right-wing women for that reason. It's like, why are you defending other people to, dicks to you?
Well, largely I think it's because they got into a position of power, usually by luck, and they're like, well, I gotta do this to stay in power.
Yeah, but I'm also talking about, right-wing women who are like...
Like trad wives.
Well, no, not necessarily. That's another discussion. But right-wing women who are not trad wives, who are surprised by the fact that they encounter a lot of sexism. It's like you are basically defending the right. No, that's not the right, but you're defending the men in order to be to you. It's so counterproductive. It doesn't make any sense.
When Arlene Foster resigned, she did like a goodbye speech, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was totally written for her own party, like the people that got rid of her, basically. And it was it did sound like a liberal speech where she was like, I encourage women to seek positions of power wherever they can find them. This is a very right-wing woman. She said that because she knew it would send the men in her party into a fit of rage. Because like the idea, she's officially encouraging, you got rid of me because basically I was a woman and you didn't think much of me. Well, I'm just going to say, you could get rid of me, but who's to say all the other women's won't come and take power too? Just saying. And all the men are like, God damn it, all the women's getting in here and taking our jobs. Stick at her.
Yeah, I never understood that men are so fucking terrified and intimidated by women. When a woman enters what's, supposed to be a male place, they're like, get the f*** out of here!
So what is your final judgment on the new leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, Edwin Poots, or Poops, if you will? Do you, what punishment would you give to him if you could?
I don't know, make him poop himself for eternity?
The sad thing is, he's the most boring speaker in the entire world, and he literally sounds like one of those Microsoft voices. It doesn't sound real. He doesn't have his diction or like the cadence of the way he talks sounds like he's Microsoft Sam. And I don't get it. It's like, wow, you have the charisma of a brick, but the hatred of Donald Trump.
Quite impressive, really.
Yeah, I know. Trust Northern Ireland to get the most hateful bigot imaginable, but they're also boring. At least Trump will give you a laugh every now and again.
Yeah.
Well, that is all we have time for you today. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what we do, please consider going over to patreon.com/the Free Speech Podcast and giving some money, $1, $2, $5, $10. And so we can slowly build up Christina's army of angry women who shall forcefully topple the patriarchy and wear Edwin Poots' head as a hat. Now,
it sounds like an incredibly ugly hat, but...
Of course, now that if you do join Patreon, you get the added benefit that you will be able to watch each release on Wednesdays instead of Saturdays. So you get into the exclusive club. So do that, get on board and follow the sheep. All right. I'm Niall. This was Christina. This was the Free Speech Podcast. We'll see you again next week.